Karma never forgets a name, and it never misses its mark. Witness the scales of justice slowly balance themselves in every cinematic chapter we bring to life. Experience the powerful reality of payback right here. Subscribe now to see the truth unfold before your eyes. The moment my husband walked back through our front door after 10 days away, he was smiling. Not the warm, relieved smile of a man who missed his wife. It was something else entirely: slow, satisfied, like a man who had gotten away with something and already decided he deserved a reward for it. He dropped his suitcase in the entryway, looked around our living room, the way someone looks at a hotel room they're checking out of, and said, "You kept the place clean. Good." I looked at him calmly and said, "Welcome home. There's something on the kitchen table for you." He walked past me toward the kitchen, still smiling. I heard the sound of a folder sliding across the table. Then silence. Then, "What is this?" "Everything you need," I said. But to understand how completely he had misjudged me, I need to take you back 11 months. Back to when I still believed the life we had built together was real. My husband and I had been married for 9 years. His name, for this story, is my husband, and that is all he needs to be. I am Maya. I was 37 years old, a registered nurse working the day shift at a hospital 40 minutes from our home in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. We had a daughter named Claire who was 7, in 2nd grade, obsessed with dinosaurs and strawberry ice cream. We had a mortgage. We had a joint savings account we had been building for 6 years. We had what I thought, on most days, was a good marriage. Not a perfect marriage. I want to be honest about that. We argued about the usual things: money, whose turn it was to handle school pickups, the fact that he traveled for work more than either of us liked. He was in corporate sales, and the travel had always been part of the deal. I had accepted it a long time ago. What I had not accepted, what I did not yet know I needed to accept or reject, was that somewhere in the last 2 years, the travel had become something else. The first thing I noticed, before I had any language for what I was noticing, was a shift in how he came home. For most of our marriage, when my husband returned from a work trip, he came back depleted. He would drop his bag, hug Claire for a long time, eat whatever I had made for dinner, and fall asleep early. That was just who he was. Travel drained him. He had told me that 100 times. But starting about 18 months before that morning in our kitchen, he began coming home different. Energized. Almost restless. He would arrive, greet us quickly, shower immediately, not later, immediately, and then spend the evening on his phone in the other room. I told myself he was winding down from a hectic week. I told myself a lot of things. There were other things I noticed but filed away. A credit card statement for an account I didn't recognize, which he explained was a new company card he had forgotten to mention. A receipt I found in his jacket pocket for a restaurant in Denver, the city he had just come back from, yes, but a restaurant that charged $340 for 2 people, when he was supposedly dining alone. A new cologne that appeared on his side of the bathroom counter, with no explanation. Not a bad cologne. An expensive one. I smelled it and thought, I didn't buy that. He didn't mention buying it. And then I put it down and made breakfast and got Claire ready for school. I think about that moment sometimes. How close I was, even then, to knowing. How I chose, in that small ordinary moment, to put the bottle down and walk away. The thing that finally broke through my deliberate not knowing was a Tuesday evening in November. Claire was at her grandmother's for the week. My mother-in-law had taken her for a visit, which in retrospect was something my husband had specifically arranged. I didn't understand the significance of that until much later. I came home from a double shift exhausted, wanting nothing but a shower and sleep. My husband was supposed to be home. His car was in the driveway. But the house was quiet in a way that felt wrong, and when I walked into our bedroom, I found him standing near the closet, phone in hand, startled in a way that a man with nothing to hide is never startled. "I didn't hear you come in," he said. "I noticed," I said. He laughed. "I didn't. I took my shower. I made myself a plate of leftovers." I sat at the kitchen table and thought carefully about the receipt, the cologne, the new energy, the immediate showers, the way he had startled when he saw me in my own bedroom. And I thought about the fact that our daughter was away for a week, and he had not suggested we do anything together: no dinner out, no quiet evening at home. He had, in fact, seemed relieved. I did not cry that night. I want to make that clear. I had cried at the beginning of our marriage when we fought. and somewhere along the way I had stopped. That night I did not cry. I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth before I did anything else. I was not going to confront him based on a receipt and a cologne bottle and a feeling. I was a nurse. I understood the importance of evidence. I understood that a diagnosis made without proper documentation is just a guess, and guesses get people hurt. I opened a new note on my phone and started writing down everything I could remember: dates, amounts, behaviors, observations. The note was titled Patient History. I gave my husband a patient number instead of his name. I approached it the way I approached anything complicated at work, methodically, without emotion, one data point at a time. Over the next 3 months, the data points accumulated. I requested paper statements for the joint account and began reviewing them carefully for the first time in years. I found a pattern of ATM withdrawals: $200 to $300, almost always on Thursdays, always from machines located near his office downtown. He had a direct deposit and a company expense account. There was no reason he needed that much cash on a weekly basis. I started noting the mileage on his car before and after work trips. I compared it to the distances between Columbus and the cities he claimed to be visiting. On a trip to Cincinnati, a 2-hour drive, he put on 400 miles more than the round trip should have required. I found the cologne bottle again, this time with a small sticker on the bottom from a boutique in a neighborhood I had never been to. A neighborhood I looked up and found was located 45 minutes from our house in a direction he had no professional reason to travel. I bought a small notebook, blue, with a clasp, and kept it in my locker at work. I wrote down everything in that notebook. Dates, amounts, mileage discrepancies. I used different colored pens. Green for confirmed facts. Red for observations that needed follow-up. Blue for financial irregularities. By the end of the second month, there was very little green and a great deal of red and blue. I told no one. Not my sister Renata, who called every Sunday and would have sensed something immediately. Not my closest friend from nursing school, who had been through her own divorce and would have, with the best intentions in the world, pushed me to act before I was ready. Not my mother, who I loved fiercely and who would have said something that made everything harder. I kept the blue notebook in my locker. I kept my face neutral. I kept making dinners and attending Claire's school events and asking my husband polite questions about his day. He had no idea. In January, I contacted a private investigator. I found him through a referral service that several nurses at my hospital had quietly used over the years, the kind of thing no one announces but everyone somehow knows about. His name was Robert, and he was a retired sheriff's deputy with a practical, unsentimental manner that I immediately respected. I gave him 3 months of notes from the blue notebook. He looked through them for a long time without speaking. "You've done a lot of the work already," he said. "I wanted to know what I was paying for," I told him. He smiled slightly. "When do you want to start?" I gave him a start date of the following Monday. What Robert documented over the next 6 weeks was this. My husband had been conducting an ongoing relationship with a woman named Sophie, who worked in the marketing department of a competing firm. They had met at an industry conference 18 months earlier, which aligned exactly with when I had first noticed the changes in how he came home. They met for dinner at least twice a week, always at a restaurant in a neighborhood neither of them worked in. They had stayed together in hotel rooms on 4 separate occasions that Robert was able to document, on nights when my husband had told me he was staying overnight for work. Robert had photographs. He had dates and times. He had credit card receipts, obtained through legal means, showing my husband had spent nearly $11,000 on this relationship over the course of a year. $11,000 from our joint account, from the ATM withdrawals, from a credit card he had opened in his name only, routed to a P.O. box I had never known about. The morning Robert delivered his report, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before my shift started. I read through everything twice. I looked at the photographs. Then I put the folder in my work bag, went inside, and took care of my patients. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney the following week. Her name was Patricia, and she had 22 years of experience in family law in Franklin County. She was direct and thorough, and had a way of laying out consequences that was neither cruel nor falsely comforting. We met 3 times before I made any decisions. During those meetings, I learned what I was entitled to under Ohio law, what the process looked like, what I needed to document and preserve, and most importantly, what I should not do before filing. She told me to make copies of everything financial and store them somewhere outside the house. I did. She told me to open a personal checking account in my name only. I did. She told me not to move any money from the joint account, which would complicate things. I didn't. She told me to be patient, because the right timing mattered. I asked her, how will I know when the timing is right? She said, you'll know. She was right. The timing announced itself. In March, my husband told me he had a national sales conference in Phoenix. 10 days. He showed me the registration email, the hotel confirmation, the company itinerary. It looked legitimate. It was, I later discovered, partly legitimate. There was a conference. He was registered. He attended 2 days of it. The other 8 days, he and Sophie were at a rental property outside Scottsdale that he had booked using a credit card I was not supposed to know about. The day he told me about the Phoenix trip, I called Patricia. I told her the dates. She filed the following morning. I want to describe the 10 days he was gone, because people often assume they were miserable. They weren't. They were among the clearest 10 days I had experienced in years. Claire and I ate cereal for dinner on 2 of those nights because neither of us wanted a real meal and we both thought it was hilarious. We watched every dinosaur documentary available on every streaming service. I repainted the downstairs bathroom a deep, warm green, a color I had wanted for 3 years and my husband had always vetoed. I slept in the middle of our bed with my arms out. I called my sister Renata on day 6 and told her everything. There was a long silence. Then Renata said, Maya, how long have you known? A while, I said. Another silence. What do you need from me? Nothing right now, I said. But I wanted you to know. She was, as I had known she would be, exactly what a sister should be. No panic, no excessive advice, no immediate declarations of war. She said she was proud of me and that she would be there when I needed her. We talked for 2 hours. When we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight. My mother found out differently. I had not planned to tell her before everything was finalized. My mother was loving and devoted and deeply, genuinely convinced that marriage required preservation above almost everything else. She had stayed in her own complicated marriage for 40 years because she believed in commitment the way other people believe in gravity, as simply and absolutely as that. I understood her. I had, for a long time, shared some version of that belief. But I also knew what she would say. And I knew I couldn't hear it until I was standing on solid ground. What happened was that my sister, with the best of intentions and no concept of what I was actually managing, mentioned it during a family phone call on day 8 of the Phoenix trip. My mother called me within the hour. To her credit, she didn't shout. She was quiet, which in some ways was worse. She said she thought I was making a decision I would regret. She said 9 years was not something you walked away from. She said Claire deserved to grow up with both parents in the same house. She said she thought I should wait, think longer, try counseling, consider whether I was sure. I let her finish. Then I said, very calmly, Mom, he spent $11,000 of our savings on another woman. He lied to me about where he was for 18 months. I have documentation of all of it. I have spoken to an attorney 3 times. The papers are already filed. I am not making a decision, I have made one. I need you to support me now, or I need you to stay quiet until you can. Another silence. She said, quietly, okay. That was all. Just, okay. We stayed on the phone for a few minutes without saying much, and then we said goodnight. And when I checked on Claire before bed, my daughter was asleep with a library book about the Cretaceous period open on her chest, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment thinking about how much of the right life was still in front of us. My husband came home on a Thursday. He came through the front door the way he had been coming home for the past year, with that energy, that restlessness, that specific self-satisfied quality that I now understood completely. He set his bag down. He glanced around the room. He noticed the green bathroom and didn't mention it. He hugged Claire briefly and told her he'd brought her something from Phoenix, which turned out to be a keychain shaped like a cactus. She said thank you and went back to her book. He walked into the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water. He looked at me over the counter and said, good trip. Productive. I'm sure, I said. There was a red folder on the kitchen table. I had placed it there that morning. It was not thick. Patricia had told me it didn't need to be. Everything that mattered was inside. He looked at it. "What's that?" "It's for you," I said. "Take your time with it." He picked it up. He opened it. I watched his face the way I had, over the past months, learned to watch things calmly, attentively, without telegraphing what I was observing. The color shifted first in his jaw, then spread upward. His hand with the folder went very still. He read for a moment without speaking. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed completely. The restless satisfaction was gone. What was left underneath it was smaller than I expected. "Maya, the attorney's contact information is on the second page," I said. "I'd recommend calling soon. There are some deadlines." He set the folder down. He started to say something about 9 years, about our daughter, about whether this was really what I wanted. I noticed, listening to him, that he did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not say, "I made a mistake." He moved immediately to negotiation what could be salvaged, what I was throwing away, what I was doing to Claire's life. It was the argument of a man who understood he had lost something but had not yet understood why. I said, "I'm going to take Claire to her grandmother's for the evening. I've arranged for you to have until 9 tonight to collect what you need from the spare room. A list of what I'm keeping is also in the folder." He looked at me for a long moment. "You planned all of this," he said. Not quite a question. "Yes," I said. He asked me when. I told him I had started the blue notebook the same week he had stood in our bedroom holding his phone, startled to see me come home. He didn't say anything after that. Claire and I spent the evening at my mother-in-law's house, who knew nothing yet and made us grilled cheese sandwiches and let Claire show her 17 videos about pterodactyls on the family tablet. When we drove home that night, my husband's car was gone from the driveway. The spare room was partially emptied. The red folder was still on the kitchen table, which told me he had taken photographs of the contents rather than removing the originals, which was exactly what Patricia had predicted he would do. I made Claire her bedtime snack. I read her 2 chapters of her library book. I turned off her lamp and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a few minutes. She said, sleepily, "Mom, did something happen while Dad was in Phoenix?" I said, "Some things are going to be different for a while. But you're going to be okay." "We both are." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is the green bathroom going to stay?" "Yes," I said. "The green bathroom is staying." "Good," she said. "I like it." I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. The divorce process in Ohio takes time, and I will not pretend the months that followed were easy. There were court dates and mediations and a morning when my husband's attorney made an argument about the joint savings that made me so angry I had to focus very deliberately on a water stain on the ceiling tile to keep my face neutral. There was a period when my mother struggled with her feelings about what had happened and said a few things that required me to be more forgiving than I naturally felt. There were evenings when Claire asked questions I didn't have perfect answers to, and I had to hold the uncertainty carefully, like something fragile. But there was also this. 6 months after he left, I ran into a colleague of his at the grocery store, someone I had always liked, a straightforward woman named Diane who worked in his company's HR department. She paused in the cereal aisle and looked at me with an expression I recognized. "I heard things got complicated," she said carefully. I said, "They did." She said, "For what it's worth, he was moved to a different team in February. There were some issues that came to light." She paused. I probably shouldn't say more than that. I told her she didn't need to. I thought about that conversation for a while afterward. About how the folder on the kitchen table had contained not just the divorce petition but copies of Robert's documentation, photographs, dates, receipts, all of it clearly labeled. About how the attorney for the other party in a legal proceeding sometimes requests evidence. About how evidence sometimes travels in directions you don't fully anticipate once it's in legal channels. I don't know exactly what Diane knew. I didn't ask. Some things you don't need confirmed. What I do know is this. The savings account, which had carried $11,000 of damage, was addressed in the settlement. The house became mine and Claire's. My husband moved into an apartment 20 minutes away and sees our daughter every other weekend, and Claire, who is resilient in the way that children sometimes are when they are loved well and told the truth in appropriate doses, has adjusted better than I feared. My mother came to the house for Easter 4 months after the divorce was final. She walked into the kitchen and stopped when she saw the bathroom doorway. "That's a good color," she said. "I know," I said. "I've known for 3 years." She looked at me for a moment, the particular look she has had since I was small, the one that means she is thinking something she isn't sure how to say. Then she crossed the kitchen and hugged me for a long time without speaking, and I let her, because some things don't need language and some silences are not empty. Renata came to visit 2 weeks later, and we sat on the back porch after Claire was in bed. And she asked me if I was okay, not in the worried, recursive way people ask when they don't want the real answer, but in the direct way she has had since we were children. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said, "I'm more okay than I've been in 2 years. Ask me again in a year, and I think the answer will be better." She poured more wine into my glass. "Deal," she said. "There is one more thing I want to say, because the comments I have read on stories like mine often ask some version of the same question. Was there a moment when you thought about staying? About trying again?" Yes. Once. About 3 weeks after he left, on a night when Claire had a nightmare and cried for a long time and then fell back asleep asking for her father, and I sat in her doorway in the dark listening to the house settle and thought about how much simpler it might have been to never open the blue notebook at all. I sat there for a while with that thought. I let it be real. And then I got up and went back to bed, because a thought is not a truth, and the simplicity of not knowing was a thing I had already used up. The green bathroom is still green. Claire is 8 now, and she has moved from the Cretaceous period to a phase involving deep-sea creatures, anglerfish, giant squid, things that live in the dark and make their own light. She drew a picture of a bioluminescent jellyfish last week and taped it to the refrigerator. I look at it every morning when I get Claire's breakfast ready. I think it's a good thing to have on your wall.